a lot about uncertainty and how a lot of our perception about what's happening is something fabricated by the mind, and how we become identified with that story and we get lost. But there are certain things that are certain. And one of those things is impermanence.
Mm-hmm.
It's a law.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing stays the same.
Mm-hmm.
Everything changes. Loss is inevitable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we spend a lot of our time protecting ourselves against accepting that. A lot of our conditioned strategies is in trying to keep things the same because it hurts. It hurts when things change. And yet it's inevitable, and it's important to take the time to grieve.
Mm-hmm.
Grief is a doorway into love.
Mm-hmm.
That while it might be uncomfortable, the flavor of grief has a quality of love.
Mm-hmm.
It softens the heart. It shows the truth of our vulnerability. And it becomes a gateway into connection to what really matters. There's an aspect that's very awakening to it. And usually grief doesn't come alone. And grief is accompanied by many different emotions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Maybe anger,
Mm-hmm.
maybe confusion, maybe helplessness.
Mm-hmm.
We have to lose sometimes to have space for something else to emerge. And we never know what that is.
Mm-hmm.
And that too is hard because I don't know what's going to emerge,
Mm-hmm.
which brings me back to doubt and uncertainty and the discomfort of that. So it's not a small thing, this impermanence. It takes us through the full range of our emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, understanding it at a deep level also makes it possible for us to understand the preciousness of each moment,
Mm-hmm.
because we know it will change. There's two instances where I felt very deep grief. One was when my father passed away.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting because it was clean. It was just pure grief. There wasn't a mixture of anger or doubt or guilt or other things. It was pure and just Like there was no mixtures of other colors and hues to make something else. It was just grief. And in its purest form, it was a doorway that I never wanted to stop experiencing. It was a portal into the depth of the sacredness of what we have here right now. And a deep understanding that there is so much more than we can comprehend.
Mm-hmm.
Like really felt like I was taken to the edge where I was able to see a tear in the veil of our reality and see that there was so much beyond that. And that physical experience of grief actually was expansive. It wasn't contracted. It was like a falling. And that the crying that would happen would start in my diaphragm as not even, there were not, it wasn't crying. I can't explain what it was. There was a tightening of the diaphragm and it would come and there would be a very long exhalation of a release and a settling and making contact and steeping into it. So that was an incredible physical and an emotional experience to be with that. The second most powerful experience that I had of grief was my partner leaving me unexpectedly and then finding out that there was a lie in all of that. And that grief was very confusing because it was mixed in with anger, fear, a lot of doubt about what's real, what's not real, self-blame. I mean, it was very messy. I had a questioning about identity, self-worth. I mean, it was so complex. And that one, the body would contract and it was almost like a storm would physically hit. And the comparison that I would make of it was, this is what it's like to be in labor, where the seed of a thought would come up. And from that seed, I almost want to say the liver area, there would be a tightness, the feeling of betrayal, which I know is it's not really a feeling, it's kind of unblaming. It's another story. Like the feeling of betrayal and unfairness resided in very different places in the body. And it would hit me, and I knew when it was going to start, like a contraction. And I knew the moment that it would go into the full contraction, I had no control. And it was just all of these thoughts, this physical pain, this almost like bringing out. And when it would pass, it would be like nothing had happened. It was just, oh, that was crazy. That was really intense. And now it's nothing. But I knew it would happen again. And I went through these contractions for probably about a year. Like they started to, instead of, they would intensify and something would come up, there would be a release. And then over time, the waves got smaller and smaller. And there still is, small, tiny waves, even years after, right? Because there's something that hasn't been resolved within myself with that. And what was really interesting about that experience is how at some point I got very interested. I was just like, okay, it's very unpleasant. I'm absolutely gripped when it happens. There's this feeling of despair, of helplessness. There's nothing I can do. This is never going to end. All of that anger, all of that, discomfort. I want to die. I actually want to end this. And then it would go away as if nothing had happened. How could both of these be a reality within minutes apart? And it just made me realize that there is something so much more than what we can comprehend. And that this body is a vessel for things passing through. And that if we're able to tolerate the unbearable just for a little bit longer, there is a discharge that happens that can be forward moving. It's not something that we're doing. It's something that we're allowing. And what would stabilize me through those really intense physical and emotional pain was at some point, once I got past the fatigue of like, oh God, this is never going to end, or how pathetic, I'm still going through, like all of that. I can get past that. I was just like, okay, here it comes, here it comes. All right, what's it going to be? And I would get into it and I would drop in and notice my face contorting and notice the muscles in my neck tightening up and the shoulders rising and this posture. And then there would be a release, and it became such an interesting opportunity to study what it's like to have this aspect of humanness.
Of humanness, yeah.
And I'm bringing this all up because even the discomfort is an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
That we have this bias towards believing that reality should be a particular way. It should feel good.
Yeah.
That we should be happy. And that if anything is outside of that realm, there's a problem, or we're doing something wrong, or we need to adjust.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be partially true, but discomfort is just a part of life.
Mm-hmm.
And if we are able, if we have the capacity to actually let that energetic flow through and out of the body, which oftentimes is just a matter of holding space and letting it happen without jumping into the compulsion to do something about it, without getting lost in the story of what it means, but just be at the very basic sensory and emotional level with it, it does pass. This is the flip side of impermanence.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to last forever.
Right.
It too will pass.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding the law of impermanence, not from a cognitive level. This is something that we arrive at by going through many lifetimes of suffering, from grasping and trying to hold on to things and maintain it for as long as we can because we like it.
Mm-hmm.
Or the pain of, I'm going to avoid this because I know that what it means is I'm going to suffer afterwards. Once we've gone through all of our strategies that we habitually go to and notice that it doesn't change anything in the long run, that is when we are able to, on a visceral level, understand the power of impermanence. And this deep understanding is what dissolves the strategic patterns that we have. Is this deep insight helps us understand that everything that we've been trying to do to control and manage circumstances
Mm-hmm.
doesn't work.
Right. Right. Oh.
And that we have the resilience to actually be with impermanence.
Mm-hmm.
We have it.
Mm-hmm.
And that change is a fundamental component to growth.
Right.
If everything stays the same, if everything is relatively okay, there's a complacency
Right.
that happens. And in that complacency comes a diminishing of vitality. Impermanence is nourishment for our development. Each moment actually is a loss and a new emergence.
Mm-hmm.
Every single moment. We don't see with such precision. The mind is coarse and generalizes. You'll see maybe with time that as we continue with this practice, a gift that comes along with it is equanimity. Meaning that as we attune ourselves to the impermanence of everything, we no longer are so rocked by it because we just notice it and understand it deeply. And so there's less of a tendency to attach ourselves so much onto something because there is this understanding that it too will change. And when I say equanimity, I don't mean it in a non-caring way or a clinical, I'm just this witness and I'm observing and nothing is affecting me. I mean it in a way of wisdom that we've experienced deeply these fluctuations and we have an understanding of how things unfold.
Right.
And so we no longer get caught so much in the things that used to hook us before.
Right.
And there's a tremendous amount of freedom in that, in the experiencing of that, and in others seeing that we are experiencing that. That there's less expectations put on people for being a particular way, or in experiences for having to also fit our idea of how it should be.
That's for sure.
And that state of openness and receptivity without attachment is a state that feels safer for others. There's a profound impact on ourselves and to the world as we move in this direction.